All right, settle in, grab a cup of coffee, because I've got a story for you that'll curl your hair. The one narrating this whole unbelievable mess. That's me, Brenda, and I'm a woman of 60 years. Though some days, after all this, I feel about 160. You are not going to believe the story I have for you today. Stick with me till the end, because what my own sweet Grandma Agnes did, and what it did to our family, especially to me, her granddaughter, well, it's gonna leave you absolutely floored. My 98-year-old grandma stole a baby and hid the truth for 70 years. Yes, you heard that right? 70 years. Lord have mercy. Where do I even begin? It all feels like some kind of wild dream, the kind you wake up from sweating and thanking your lucky stars it wasn't real. Only this was real. As real as the wrinkles on my face and the ache in my heart that still pops up now and again when I think too hard on it. My Grandma Agnes, well, she was just about the sun and moon to me for most of my life. 98 years old she was when the final curtain fell. Bless her heart. 98. Can you imagine? She'd seen wars and depressions, men on the moon, and computers you could hold in your hand. And through it all, she was our rock, the matriarch, the one with the endless supply of ginger snap cookies and even more endless stories. Her little house, the one she'd lived in since before I was a twinkle in my daddy's eye, always smelled of cinnamon and old books. It was a haven, a place where the world outside just melted away. I spent countless summers there, listening to her tales of back in my day, when life was simpler, or so she said. She taught me to knit, though I never quite got the hang of it like she did. Her fingers, gnarled as they were with age, could still fly over those needles like nobody's business. She wasn't just a grandmother. She was a cornerstone of my world. Always a kind word. Always a patient ear. My own mama, Sarah, Agnes's oldest, she was a good woman, but a bit flighty, you know, always chasing some new dream. Dad was steady, but quiet. So, Grandma Agnes? She was the steady hand, the warm hug, the one who seemed to understand everything without you even having to say a word. I thought I knew her. I really, truly did. Turns out, I didn't know the half of it, not even a quarter. And maybe that's the hardest part to swallow, even now. That the person you thought you knew best could be hiding something so monumental, so earth-shattering. It all started about 6 months before Grandma passed. She'd had a fall, a bad one, and it became clear pretty quick that her time with us was drawing to a close. She was lucid, mostly, but frail. Mama and my Aunt Lily, Grandma's other daughter, or so I thought, were taking turns staying with her, but it was a lot. I'd go over every chance I got, help out, sit with Grandma, hold her hand. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, with Grandma dozing in her armchair and the house hushed except for the tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the hall, that I decided to do a bit of preliminary sorting in the attic. Mama had mentioned it, said it would need doing eventually, and Lord knows that attic was packed to the rafters with 70-plus years of accumulated stuff. Now, I'm not usually one for snooping, but Grandma Agnes, she never threw anything away. Waste not, want not, she'd always chirp. So, you can imagine. Boxes piled high, old trunks, furniture draped in dusty sheets. It was like stepping back in time. I was mostly looking for old photo albums, things we could share, maybe jog some happy memories for her. I pulled down this one hat box, a bit battered, covered in faded floral wallpaper. It looked ancient. I figured it was full of old hats, you know, but it felt heavier than that. I set it on an old dresser, blew off a layer of dust that probably hadn't been disturbed since the Eisenhower administration, and lifted the lid. No hats. Instead, there were baby things. Tiny, yellowed, lace-trimmed gowns, a pair of knitted booties so small they'd barely fit a doll, a silver rattle, tarnished with age. My first thought was, oh, these must be Mama's or Aunt Lily's baby things. Sweet, you know? A little treasure trove. Grandma Agnes had 2 daughters. My mom, Sarah, who was the elder by about 5 years, and Aunt Lily. Aunt Lily was always a bit of a mystery, quieter than Mama, more reserved. She never married, lived a simple life, not too far from Grandma. We all loved Aunt Lily, of course. She had this gentle way about her, and the most beautiful garden you ever did see. She was Aunt Lily, part of the furniture of our family, in the best possible way. I was carefully lifting out a fragile, hand-stitched baby blanket, the silk edging crumbling a little in my fingers, when I felt something hard, tucked inside its folds. I reached in, curious, and my fingers closed around a small, cool object. I pulled it out. It was a locket. A tiny, heart-shaped silver locket, tarnished, almost black in places. It was clearly very old. My heart did a little flutter. A secret treasure. I fumbled with the clasp, my fingers a bit clumsy. It was stiff, but finally, it popped open. Inside, on one side, was a miniature sepia-toned photograph of a baby I didn't recognize. A beautiful little thing, with wide, dark eyes. On the other side, engraved in delicate, old-fashioned script, was a name. And that name sent a shiver right down my spine, colder than any draft in that dusty old attic, because the name engraved inside that locket wasn't Sarah, and it wasn't Lily. It was Eleanor, and I swear on my grave I had never, ever heard the name Eleanor mentioned in our family. Not once. Who in the Sam Hill was Eleanor? I just stood there, staring at that locket, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light coming through the grimy attic window. My mind was racing. An old girlfriend of Grandpa's? A child who'd passed young? A family tragedy Grandma never spoke of? It felt significant. Too significant to be nothing. And the baby things, they felt too carefully preserved, too deliberately hidden away in that specific box. Back in my day, we didn't just keep random baby clothes unless they meant something special. Deep down, a little knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. What was this? And why did it feel like I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see? I carefully placed the locket back in the blanket, tucked it all back into the hat box, and put the lid on. My hands were trembling a little. I told myself I was being silly, letting my imagination run away with me. It was probably nothing. Just an old keepsake from someone Grandma once knew. Right? But that little voice, the one that always pipes up when something's not quite right, it wouldn't be quiet. It kept whispering, "Eleanor, Eleanor." I went downstairs, my head buzzing. Grandma Agnes was awake, sipping some tea Mama had left for her. She looked so small in her big chair, her white hair like a wispy halo. "Find anything interesting up there, dear?" she asked, her voice a little reedy. I forced a smile. "Oh, just some old linens, Grandma. Lots of dust." I couldn't bring myself to mention the hat box. Not yet. Something told me to hold my tongue. Was I already becoming part of a secret, just by finding it? She just nodded, a little smile playing on her lips. "Dust to dust, Brenda. That's all we are." Her words, usually a comfort, sent another chill through me. Later that evening, after I got home, I couldn't shake it. Eleanor. Who was she? I thought about my family tree, the stories Grandma had told us over the years. Aunts, uncles, cousins twice removed. I had a pretty good map of our kin in my head. No Eleanors, not a single one. Could it be from my grandpa's side? He'd passed long before I was born. a figure more myth than man in my mind. Grandma rarely spoke of him in detail, just that he was a good man, taken too soon. The more I thought about it, the more that hatbox seemed out of place. Grandma Agnes was meticulous. Her albums were labeled, her keepsakes usually displayed, or stored with care. This box felt different, hidden, almost forgotten on purpose. But if it was forgotten, why keep it at all? Questions, buzzing around my head like angry bees. I knew, just knew, this wasn't the end of it. This little locket, this name Eleanor, it was a thread, and I had a terrible, sinking feeling that if I pulled on it, something much larger might start to unravel. Lord, if I only knew then just how much was about to come undone. That was just the first whisper of the hurricane to come. And you won't believe what I found out next. A few days passed, and that name, Eleanor, just kept rattling around in my head like a loose pebble in a shoe. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hatbox and its contents were more than just old memories. There was a story there, I was sure, of it. And a part of me, the curious, maybe even a little bit nosy part, wanted to know what it was. But another bigger part of me was scared. Scared of what I might find. Scared of upsetting Grandma in her final days. Scared of... well, I didn't know what exactly. And that was almost the worst part. I tried to talk to Mama, Sarah, about it first. Casually, you know. We were having coffee at her kitchen table one morning. Mama, I started, trying to sound offhand. Did Grandma ever mention anyone named Eleanor? Maybe an old friend or someone from Grandpa's family? Mama frowned, stirring her coffee. She was a woman who lived mostly in the present. The past was a fuzzy, half-forgotten landscape to her, unless it involved a particularly good party, or a handsome beau from her youth. Eleanor? She repeated, tapping her spoon against the cup. Nope, doesn't ring a bell. Why do you ask? Honey? Oh, no reason really, I fibbed, feeling my cheeks warm a little. Just thought I heard the name somewhere and wondered. She shrugged. Can't say I recall anyone by that name. Grandma knew a lot of people in her day, though. Could be anyone. And just like that, she changed the subject to Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses down the street. So much for that avenue. Mama wasn't going to be any help. I could see that plain as day. If there was a secret, she was either not in on it, or she was a better actress than I gave her credit for. My next thought was Aunt Lily. She was quieter, more observant. And she'd spent so much time with Grandma, especially in these later years. Maybe she'd know something. I waited until I saw her at Grandma's house a couple of days later. She was tending to Grandma's little window box of herbs, her touch so gentle. Aunt Lily was always gentle. Aunt Lily, I began, trying the same casual approach. I was just wondering, do you remember Grandma ever talking about someone named Eleanor? She paused, her trowel hovering over a sprig of rosemary. She turned, and for a fleeting second I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise? Confusion? Or was it something else? It was gone so fast I couldn't. Be sure, Eleanor, she said, her voice soft as always. No, Brenda, I don't think so. Why? Again, I mumbled something about just being curious. She looked at me for a moment longer, a thoughtful expression on her face, then turned back to her herbs. Grandma's memory isn't what it used to be, you know, she said quietly. Sometimes she mixes things up, and that was that. Another dead end. Or was it? Her reaction, that tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation, it stuck with me. Was she protecting Grandma? Or was there really nothing to it? Goodness gracious, this was getting frustrating. I knew I couldn't just march up to Grandma Agnes and ask her. Not in her condition. And besides, if it was a secret she'd kept for decades, she wasn't likely to just spill the beans because I asked. Now was she? No, I needed something more. More than just a name on a locket. So, I did something I'm not entirely proud of. I went back to the attic. I waited until Grandma was asleep, and Mama and Aunt Lily were out running errands. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. It felt wrong, like I was betraying a trust. But that nagging feeling, that sense of a puzzle with a missing piece, it was too strong. I had to know I found the hatbox again, right where I'd left it. This time I went through it more carefully, item by item. The tiny gowns, the booties, the rattle. And then, tucked right at the very bottom, underneath a layer of yellowed tissue paper, I found it. A small, leather-bound diary. It was the kind with a little brass lock, but the lock was broken, or maybe it had never been used. The leather was worn, the pages brittle. My breath caught in my throat. This had to be it. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The first few pages were blank. Then an entry, in faded blue ink. The handwriting was loopy, youthful, but unmistakably Grandma Agnes's. The date at the top of the page made me gasp. It was from over 70 years ago. 70 years! I started to read. A lot of it was just everyday stuff, the musings of a young woman. Hopes, dreams, little worries about a young man named Arthur. My grandpa, I presumed. But then, the tone began to change. There were entries about feeling lonely, about wanting a baby more than anything in the world. Pages filled, with a yearning so palpable it made my own heart ache. She wrote about miscarriages, several of them. Things no one in the family had ever spoken of. My Grandma Agnes, always so stoic, so strong, had carried this private grief all her life. Lord have mercy, the poor woman. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the pages faster and faster. Then I came to a series of entries that were more agitated, vague references to a chance, a desperate hope. And then, an entry that made my blood run cold. It was short, rushed, the handwriting almost illegible in places. It's done. She's mine. My baby. No one will ever know. She's safe with me now. My little Lily. Lily? My aunt. Lily? My head swam. Aunt Lily's name wasn't Eleanor. The locket said Eleanor. What was going on? Was this diary about someone else entirely? But the timing. Aunt Lily was born, or rather, appeared in Grandma's life, around that time. Grandma always said Lily was a surprise, a late-in-life blessing, after Mama. I flipped frantically through the next few pages. There were mentions of sleepless nights, of a baby crying, of an overwhelming love mixed with a terrible, gnawing fear. And then, a few weeks after the "She's Mine" entry, another one that stopped me in my tracks. Had to get rid of the locket. Too risky. The name, Eleanor. Can't have anyone asking questions. She's Lily now. My Lily. Forever. My breath hitched. Eleanor was Lily. Or rather, Lily was Eleanor. My quiet, gentle Aunt Lily, the one who tended her garden and baked molasses cookies that were almost as good as Grandma's. She was the baby in the locket. The baby whose name Grandma had tried to erase. But why? Why change her name? Why the secrecy? If Lily was adopted, why all this cloak and dagger stuff? Adoption wasn't a crime, even back then. It was unusual, maybe, for a woman who already had a child, but not this. This felt different. This felt stolen. The word hung in the air of that dusty attic, heavy and horrifying. Stolen. I closed the diary, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it. This was too much. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. My Grandma Agnes, the woman who taught me my prayers, who epitomized kindness and decency, a baby thief? It couldn't be. It just couldn't. There had to be another explanation. A misunderstanding. I was jumping to conclusions, right? Reading things into it that weren't there. But the locket, the diary, the carefully hidden baby clothes, the changed name. It all started to paint a picture, a dark and disturbing one. I felt sick. I put the diary back in the hat box, pushing it to the very back of the shelf, as if hiding it again could somehow make it untrue. I stumbled out of the attic, my mind reeling. What was I supposed to do with this? This terrible knowledge? If you think that was a shock, let me tell you. The story was only just beginning to unfold. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and the ground beneath my feet was crumbling. I had to talk to someone who might know the truth, someone from that time. But who? Most of Grandma's contemporaries were long gone. Then I remembered Mrs. Henderson, the lady down the street with the prize-winning roses Mama had mentioned. She was ancient, well into her 90s, but her mind, when she was having a good day, was still sharp as a tack. She'd known Grandma Agnes since they were girls. If anyone knew anything, it might be her. It was a long shot, a desperate one, but I had to try. A few days later, armed with a box of chocolates, I went to visit Mrs. Henderson. She was a tiny, bird-like woman, propped up in a big armchair, surrounded by photographs and knickknacks. "Brenda, dear," she chirped, her eyes, though clouded with age, still bright. What a lovely surprise. We chatted for a while about the weather, her roses, the goings-on in the neighborhood. Then, I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was wondering if you remember when my Aunt Lily came to live with Grandma Agnes. I mean, when she was born." Mrs. Henderson's brow furrowed. "Lily? Oh yes, little Lily. Such a sweet child." She paused, her gaze distant, as if peering back through the decades. It was sudden, as I recall. One day Agnes didn't have a baby, and the next day, almost, there was Lily. Agnes said she was a relative's child, from out of state, whose parents couldn't care for her. "A private arrangement," she said. Very hush-hush. A relative's child? That wasn't the story we'd always been told. We'd been told Lily was Grandma's biological daughter, born a few years after Mama. She never really talked much about where Lily came from exactly. Mrs. Henderson continued, tapping a finger to her lips. Agnes could be a bit close-mouthed about some things, you know, especially after Arthur passed. She became very protective of her girls. My heart was hammering. Did you ever hear the name Eleanor connected with Lily or with Grandma back then?" Mrs. Henderson looked puzzled. "Eleanor? No, dear, can't say I did. Just Lily. Pretty little Lily." She smiled, a soft, reminiscent smile, and then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, even though there was no one else in the room. "You know, dear," she said, her eyes twinkling a little. "There were always whispers, back then, about how quickly Lily appeared. Some folks wondered. But Agnes, she just held her head high and loved that child, fiercely. She always said little Lily was a godsend, appeared right when she needed her most. Right after that terrible... Well, never you mind the old gossip, dear." "Terrible what?" My blood ran cold. "Terrible what, Mrs. Henderson?" I pressed, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. She just waved a dismissive, wrinkled hand. "Oh, just foolish talk from long ago. Doesn't matter now." But it did matter. It mattered more than she could possibly know. What terrible thing had happened? And why did the appearance of Lily coincide with it? I left Mrs. Henderson's house with more questions than answers. and a growing certainty that my sweet Grandma Agnes was at the center of a secret so dark it threatened to swallow our whole family whole. That phrase appeared right when she needed her most. It haunted me. It sounded less like an adoption and more like an opportunity seized, and I had a dreadful premonition about what I was going to have to do next. The conversation with Mrs. Henderson, especially that cryptic mention of a terrible event, it just wouldn't leave me alone. It was like a burr under a saddle, pricking at me constantly. Appeared right when she needed her most. Goodness gracious, the implications of that were chilling. I knew, deep in my gut, that I couldn't let this go. Not anymore. The diary, the locket, Mrs. Henderson's veiled hints. It was all pointing to something far more sinister than a simple, undocumented adoption. This wasn't just about uncovering an old family secret anymore. This felt like it was about uncovering a crime. My own grandmother. It made me feel sick to my stomach. But what was I supposed to do? Confront Grandma Agnes on her deathbed, accuse her of something so monstrous? The thought was unbearable. Yet how could I live with myself if I didn't find out the truth? And Aunt Lily. My sweet, unassuming Aunt Lily. If what I suspected was true, then her entire life, her very identity, was built on a lie. She deserved to know. Or did she? Would the truth destroy her, Lord? The weight of it all felt like it was crushing me. I decided I had to look at that diary again, more closely this time. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe there was a clue, a name. Anything that could point me towards what terrible event Mrs. Henderson had alluded to. So, back up to the attic I went, feeling like a common thief in my own grandmother's house. My hands were sweating as I pulled out the hat box and retrieved the small leather-bound journal. I sat down on an old dusty trunk, the only light coming from that single grimy window, and I started to read from the beginning again, page by agonizing page. This time, I was looking for more than just the entries about Lily, Eleanor. I was looking for context, for any mention of local news, gossip, anything out of the ordinary around the time Lily appeared. Grandma Agnes, in her youth, had a habit of jotting down little snippets of local happenings alongside her personal thoughts, and then I found it. It wasn't a dramatic, bold confession. It was almost a throwaway line, tucked into an entry about mending socks and the price of eggs, dated just a few weeks before the first mention of my baby. It read, "Such a tragedy about that poor young couple, the Cartwrights, over in Miller's Hollow. Their little Eleanor, vanished without a trace. The whole county is searching. Dreadful business. Makes one count their blessings. The Cartwrights. Miller's Hollow. Eleanor." My blood turned to ice. I swear the air in that attic dropped 10 degrees. I read the sentence again, and then again. The name from the locket. The name Grandma had tried to erase. Vanished without a trace. I felt like I was going to be sick. My mind reeled, trying to process it. Was it possible? Could my grandmother, my sweet cookie-baking Grandma Agnes, have seen this tragedy, this desperate couple's loss, not as a horror, but as an opportunity? The diary entries about her own miscarriages, her desperate yearning for another child after Mama. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. Appeared right when she needed her most. Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in my ears. I frantically searched online on my phone, my fingers clumsy and trembling. Cartwright baby missing Miller's Hollow 1950s. It took a few tries, fiddling with dates and keywords. But then, an old newspaper archive popped up. A grainy photograph of a young, stricken-looking couple. The headline, "Infant girl disappears from home. Parents devastated. Massive search underway." And there, in the article, was the baby's name. Eleanor Cartwright. 1 year old. Vanished from her crib. I dropped the phone. I couldn't breathe. This was it. This was the terrible event. This was the truth. My Grandma Agnes hadn't just informally adopted a baby. She hadn't just taken in a relative's child. She had stolen Eleanor Cartwright. She had stolen my Aunt Lily. And she had lived with that secret, that colossal, life-altering lie, for 70 years. 70 years of looking her daughter in the eye, knowing the truth. 70 years of family dinners, birthdays, Christmases, all built on this monstrous deception. I didn't know how long I sat there in the attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my family's past. The weight of this revelation, pressing down on me, it felt like hours. The initial shock gave way to a profound, hollow sadness. And then, anger. A hot, righteous anger I'd never felt towards my grandmother before. How could she? How could anyone do such a thing? To that poor family, the Cartwrights? To Lily herself, robbing her of her true identity, her true parents? I knew what I had to do. There was no more hiding, no more tiptoeing around. This was too big, too wrong. I went downstairs. Grandma Agnes was in her bed now, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. Mama was sitting beside her, dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth. Aunt Lily was in the kitchen. I could hear her softly humming as she washed up some dishes. The domesticity of it all, the peaceful, ordinary scene, felt like a cruel joke. I walked over to the bed. Mama looked up, surprised by the expression on my face, I guess. "Brenda? Honey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to talk to Grandma," I said, my voice sounding strange and tight even to my own ears. "Alone." Mama looked hesitant, then glanced at Grandma, who was watching me with those faded blue eyes, still surprisingly alert. "It's all right, Sarah," Grandma whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "Let Brenda talk." Mama squeezed my arm, a worried look on her face, and then she left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Aunt Lily came to the doorway from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I couldn't look at her. Not yet. "Just need a moment with Grandma, Aunt Lily," I managed. She nodded slowly and retreated back to the kitchen. I pulled a chair up to Grandma Agnes's bedside. I held the old, tarnished silver locket in my palm. "Grandma," I began, my voice trembling despite my resolve. "I found this, in the attic." I opened my hand and showed her the locket. Her eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, flickered to the locket. And for a moment, just a breath, I saw something in them. Fear? Regret? Or was it just the cloudiness of age? "It has a name engraved. Inside, Grandma," I continued, my voice gaining a little strength. "Eleanor." She didn't say anything, just kept looking at the locket. "I also found your old diary, Grandma." A tiny sigh escaped her lips, so faint I almost missed it. "I know, Grandma," I said, the words tearing at my own heart even as I spoke them. "I know about Eleanor Cartwright. I know she was the baby who went missing from Miller's Hollow. I know she's Aunt Lily." The silence in the room was deafening. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a hammer blow against the silence. Then, Grandma Agnes slowly turned her head on the pillow and looked directly at me. Her eyes, though weak, held a profound sadness. A tear, just one, escaped and traced a slow path down her wrinkled cheek. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Brenda. It's true. The confession, so quiet, so simple, hit me with the force of a physical blow, even though I'd already known. Hearing her say it, admit it, well, that was the last straw for my composure. But why, Grandma? I choked out, the tears starting to flow freely down my own face now. How could you? And then she began to talk. Her voice was weak, often trailing off, but the story that emerged, piece by painful piece, was one of desperation, of grief, and of a decision made in a moment of profound emotional turmoil that had irrevocably shaped all our lives. She told me about her own lost babies, the emptiness that had consumed her. She told me about Grandpa Arthur, how he'd longed for more children too. She spoke of her loneliness after he passed so young, leaving her with just young Sarah. She talked about hearing of the Cartwright baby, how the news had obsessed her. She hadn't planned it, she swore, not at first, but she'd driven over to Miller's Hollow again and again, just to be near the place, drawn by some awful compulsion. And then, one evening, she said, she'd seen an opportunity. A window left unlatched, a baby sleeping soundly. She said it was like a fog had descended over her mind. She hadn't been thinking clearly. She just knew she had to have that child. That baby felt like her baby, the one she'd lost, the one she was meant to have. I know it was wrong, child, she whispered, her eyes pleading with me. So terribly wrong. But in that moment, she felt like a gift from God, a miracle. I told myself I was rescuing her, that I could give her a better life. Oh, the lies we tell ourselves to justify the unjustifiable. She'd driven home with the sleeping baby, terrified, exhilarated, and sick with guilt all at once. She'd hidden Eleanor, changed her name to Lily, and created a story about a distant relative. And then, she'd lived with the fear of discovery every single day for 70 years. Every knock on the door, every stranger's glance had sent a jolt of terror through her. I loved her, Brenda, she said, tears streaming down her face now. I loved Lily with all my heart, as if she were my own flesh and blood. Maybe even more, because I knew I didn't deserve her. I listened, my anger slowly giving way to a complex mix of pity and horror. It wasn't an excuse, not by a long shot. What she did was unforgivable. But hearing her side, her pain, her twisted reasoning, it made her human. A flawed, broken human, who had committed a terrible act. The hardest part was yet to come, because Aunt Lily was in the kitchen, and Mama was just outside the door. They had to know. I don't remember exactly how it happened, how Mama and Aunt Lily ended up in the room. Maybe Mama heard the raised voices, the crying. Maybe Aunt Lily sensed the storm that had broken. But suddenly, they were there. Mama looking, from me to Grandma with wide, frightened eyes. Aunt Lily, her face etched with confusion and a dawning dread. And then, somehow, the story came tumbling out again. This time, it was me talking, falteringly, repeating what Grandma had confessed, what I'd discovered. I watched Aunt Lily's face as the truth, the unbelievable, horrific truth settled upon her. I saw the confusion turn to disbelief, then to a dawning horror that mirrored my own. Her hand went to her mouth, her eyes wide and staring at Grandma Agnes, the woman she had called mother her entire life. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Mama was weeping openly, shaking her head. No, Mother, it can't be. Aunt Lily just stared at Grandma Agnes, her face as white as a sheet. For a long, terrible moment, she didn't say anything. Then she finally whispered, her voice barely a breath. So my whole life with you has been a lie? Grandma Agnes could only nod, her own tears flowing. Forgive me, Lily, she croaked. Forgive me. But Aunt Lily didn't answer. She just turned, a look of such profound devastation on her face that it broke my heart into a million pieces, and she walked out of the room. She walked out of the house. Just like that. I didn't know if our family could ever recover from that moment. It felt like an earthquake had ripped through the foundations of everything we'd ever known, and I didn't know if anything or anyone would be left standing in the rubble. And if you think that's the climax, hold on to your hats, because what happened next, well, that changed everything all over again. Lord have mercy. Those next few weeks were just a blur of misery. Aunt Lily, or Eleanor, as I guess we had to start thinking of her, she just disappeared. Not literally, thank heavens, but emotionally. She wouldn't answer her phone. She wouldn't answer the door. Mama and I were frantic, of course. We'd leave messages, food on her porch, little notes begging her to talk to us. Nothing. It was like she'd crawled into a shell and pulled the opening shut tight. And who could blame her? To find out at 70 years old that your entire life, your name, your very origins, were a complete fabrication, built on a crime committed by the woman you called mother. Well, I can't even begin to imagine the depth of that betrayal, that shock. It's a wonder she didn't just shatter into a million pieces. Grandma Agnes, bless her complicated soul, she faded fast after that. It was like the confession, the unburdening of that 70-year-old secret, had taken the last of her strength. She was mostly unresponsive, though sometimes when I sat with her, her eyes would flutter open and she'd whisper, "Lily, is she all right?" And I'd have to lie, tell her Lily was fine, just needed some time. What else could I do? The truth would have killed her then and there. She passed away peacefully in her sleep about 3 weeks after that awful day. The funeral was a quiet, somber affair. Aunt Lily didn't come. That cut Mama to the quick, I can tell you. But I understood. How could she grieve for the woman who had stolen her life, even if she had also loved her? After the funeral, Mama and I were left with the house, the memories, and this gaping wound in our family. And, of course, the hat box. I'd taken it home, with me. Inside, with the diary and the locket, I found one more thing Grandma Agnes had tucked away. It was an old savings passbook, the kind they don't even make anymore. And tucked inside the passbook were several bundles of cash, crisp $100 bills, a lot of cash, tens of thousands of dollars. There was a little note, in Grandma's shaky handwriting, for Eleanor, if the truth ever comes out, for what I took. So, she'd known. All those years, she'd known this day might come, and she'd tried, in her own way, to make some kind of restitution. But money couldn't buy back a lifetime. It couldn't erase the lies. Still, it was something. A tangible acknowledgement of her guilt, I suppose. That money, that secret stash Grandma had hoarded, it was the last piece of the puzzle. The final, quiet admission. The big question now was, what about the Cartwrights? Eleanor Cartwright's real family. Were they still alive? Did they have other children? Did they ever stop searching? Ever stop wondering what happened to their baby girl? My heart ached for them. These people I'd never met, who had suffered such an unimaginable loss. Mama was hesitant. "Brenda," she said, her eyes full of pain. "Lily, Eleanor, she's been through so much. Raking all this up, finding these people. What if it just hurts her more? What if they don't want to know? Or what if they're angry, hateful?" They were valid fears. Lord knows this whole situation was a tinderbox. But I felt a responsibility, not just to Aunt Lily, but to the Cartwrights too. They deserved to know their daughter was alive. And Aunt Lily, she deserved to know who she really was, where she came from if she wanted to. "We have to try, Mama," I said, for Lily's sake and for theirs. So I started digging again. With the information from the old newspaper articles, the name Cartwright, Miller's Hollow, and the approximate year, I began to search. It wasn't easy. Records from 70 years ago are patchy. People move, they pass away. But I'm a stubborn old bird when I set my mind to something. I contacted local historical societies, searched ancestry websites, even hired a private investigator with some of that money Grandma had left. Seemed like the right thing to do with it. And then, one day, about 2 months after Grandma Agnes passed, the investigator called. He'd found them. Or rather, he'd found Eleanor Cartwright's younger brother. Her parents sadly had passed away some years ago, never knowing what became of their lost daughter. They'd apparently searched for her until the day they died. My heart just broke hearing that. But they had another child, a son named Thomas Cartwright, who was now in his late 60s. He lived just a few states over. This was it. The moment of truth. Or another moment of truth, I guess. I talked to Mama. We decided we had to tell Aunt Lily first. We couldn't just spring this on her, or on Mr. Cartwright. This time, when we went to Aunt Lily's house, she opened the door. She looked older, tired, the light gone from her eyes. But she let us in. We sat in her neat little living room, the air thick with unspoken words. And then, gently, carefully, I told her what I'd found. About her real parents, the Cartwrights, about their lifelong search, about her brother, Thomas. She listened in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I finished, she didn't speak for a long, long time. Tears welled in her eyes, but these weren't tears of anger or betrayal. They looked like tears of something else. Sorrow, maybe, or perhaps a flicker of hope. "My brother?" she finally whispered. "I have a brother?" "Yes, Aunt Lily," I said softly. "You do." What happened next? Well, it wasn't a fairy tale. Not exactly. There were no instant, tearful reunions with a long-lost family embracing her with open arms without a second thought. Life isn't usually like a Hollywood movie, is it? But it was good. In its own complicated, messy, human way. Aunt Lily, after a lot of soul-searching, decided she wanted to meet Thomas. We helped her write a letter. It was the hardest letter she'd ever had to write, she said. Thomas, understandably, was shocked, confused, even a little angry at first, not at Lily, but at the circumstances, at Agnes, at the lost years. But he was also curious, and he'd always known somewhere deep down about the sister he'd never met, the hole her absence had left in his family. They met a few weeks later. Mama and I drove Aunt Lily. We waited in a nearby coffee shop, our nerves frayed. It was a long meeting. When Aunt Lily finally came out, her face was tear-streaked, but she was smiling. A real, genuine smile. The first I'd seen in months. Thomas, she told us, was a kind man. He had his mother's eyes, she said. He'd brought photos of their parents, of his own children and grandchildren, her nieces and nephews, her great-nieces and great-nephews. An entire family she never knew she had. It wasn't easy. There were so many questions, so much lost time. But there was also a connection. A tentative, fragile, but very real connection. Over the next year, Aunt Lily, and she decided to keep the name Lily, saying Eleanor was a ghost from a past she couldn't reclaim, but Lily was who she was, slowly, carefully, began to build a relationship with Thomas and his family. There were more visits, phone calls, shared stories. She learned about her parents, their lives, their unending love for their lost daughter. And in turn, she told Thomas about her life, about Grandma Agnes. The good parts, the love she'd felt alongside the terrible truth. It was a healing process for everyone. Grandma Agnes's money? Aunt Lily decided to use a portion of it to set up a small foundation in her biological parents' names, helping families searching for missing loved ones. It felt right, she said, a way to bring something good out of all that pain. Our family, well, we're still healing. Mama still struggles with what her mother did, with the betrayal of it all, but she and Aunt Lily, their bond as sisters, though shaken, has endured. It's different now, of course. More honest. More real. And me? I look at my Aunt Lily now, and I see a strength in her I never recognized before. She's faced the unimaginable and come through it with grace. She has two families in a way, the one that raised her, with all its flaws and terrible secrets, and the one she was stolen from, which is now, slowly, becoming hers again. Grandma Agnes. I still don't know how to feel about her sometimes. Love, anger, pity, confusion. It's all mixed up in there. She did a monstrous thing, there's no denying that. But she also loved. In her own twisted, broken way, she loved. Does that excuse it? No. Never. But it makes it human. Terribly, tragically human. This whole thing taught me that families are complicated things, full of secrets and sorrows, but also resilience and an incredible capacity for forgiveness, if you can find it in your heart. And sometimes, the deepest truths are buried under a lifetime of lies, just waiting for someone brave enough, or maybe just nosy enough like me, to pull on that first loose thread. Back in my day, we used to say the truth will out, and boy, did it ever in this case. So that's my story. A long and winding road, wasn't it? It just goes to show, you never truly know what goes on behind closed doors, or inside the hearts of the people you think you know best. What do you think? Could you ever forgive someone for a secret like that? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy these kinds of unbelievable but true family sagas, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe for more stories you just won't believe.